1. A man named Tsutomu Yamaguchi survived both the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. He was in Hiroshima on a business trip when the first bomb was dropped, and then returned home to Nagasaki the day before the second bomb was dropped. He lived to be 93 years old. 2. Roman Emperor Caligula made one of his favorite horses a senator. He also gave the horse a marble stable, an ivory manger, and a staff of servants. 3. In 1926, an Arctic explorer named Peter Freuchen escaped from an avalanche by making a knife out of his own feces. He then used the knife to amputate his frozen foot. 1. In ancient Egypt, servants were smeared with honey to attract flies away from the pharaoh. 2. In Renaissance France, a woman could take her husband to court if he was impotent. The trial involved a public inspection of the husband's genitals and a staged sexual performance in front of a jury of experts. 3. Henry VIII of England had people who were called grooms of stool, whose job it was to wipe his bottom. He had 4 such people during his reign, all of whom were knighted. 4.
In 1923, a jockey named Frank Hayes won a race at Belmont Park in New York despite being dead. He suffered a heart attack mid-race, but his body stayed in the saddle until his horse crossed the line for a 20-1 outsider victory.
And 5. On his deathbed, Voltaire was asked to renounce Satan by a visiting priest. He replied, "This is no time to be making new enemies." 1. From 1912 to 1948, the Olympic Games held competitions in the fine arts. Medals were given for literature, architecture, sculpture, painting, and music. The art created was required to be Olympic-themed. 2. Napoleon Bonaparte was once attacked by a horde of bunnies. He had requested that a rabbit hunt be arranged for himself and his men. When the rabbits were released from their cages, they charged toward Napoleon and his men in an unstoppable onslaught. 3. Ketchup was sold in the 1830s as medicine. It was sold as a cure for an upset stomach by an Ohio physician named John Cook. It wasn't popularized as a condiment until the late 19th century. 1. Roman Catholics in Bavaria founded a secret society in 1740 called the Order of the Pug. New members had to wear dog collars and scratch at the door to get in. 2. There were female gladiators in ancient Rome. A female gladiator was called a gladiatrix, plural gladiatrices. They were extremely rare, unlike their male counterparts. 3. Cleopatra wasn't actually Egyptian. She was a descendant of Alexander the Great's Macedonian general Ptolemy. She was also the first member of her dynasty to learn the Egyptian language. 1. Abraham Lincoln is in the Wrestling Hall of Fame. The 6'4" president had only one loss among his around 300 contests. He earned a reputation for this in New Salem, Illinois, as an elite fighter. 2. In Mongolia, criminals could be locked up in a wooden box as punishment until the early 20th century, sometimes left to starvation. 3. In the Victorian era, it was popular for people to photograph relatives after they had often placing them in lifelike poses. 1. In 1991, 2 tourists stumbled upon a 5,300-year-old mummified murder victim in the Alps. The corpse, nicknamed Otzi, or the Iceman, had been preserved by the ice and had several wounds that indicated he had been killed by an arrow and a blow to the head. 2. Bran Castle in Transylvania is called Dracula's Castle because it once allegedly held the real Dracula, Vlad the Impaler. Vlad was a brutal 15th century ruler of Wallachia who impaled thousands of his enemies and may have inspired Bram Stoker's fictional vampire. 1. The U.S. Army cut down the Mark Twain tree in California because people elsewhere didn't believe that trees could grow so big. The tree, which was a giant sequoia, had a slice of its trunk displayed at museums in New York and London. Only its stump remains in Kings Canyon National Park. 2. Julia Child, the famous chef and cookbook author, was a spy during World War II. She worked for the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, the precursor to the CIA, and helped develop shark repellent and secret communication systems. 1. In ancient Turkey, some people worshipped a god of weather and fertility named Teshub. He was often depicted as riding a bull or a dragon and wielding a triple thunderbolt. He also had a son named Saruma, who was the god of mountains and wild animals. 2. In 1916, there was a series of shark attacks along the New Jersey coast that killed 4 people and injured 1. The attacks inspired the novel and film Jaws by Peter Benchley. The culprit was most likely a rogue bull shark that had wandered into the freshwater creeks and rivers. 1. In 1914, a truce was declared between British and German soldiers on Christmas Day. They exchanged gifts, sang carols, and even played soccer in no man's land. The truce was unofficial and spontaneous, and did not happen again in subsequent years. 2. In 1971, a man named D.B. Cooper hijacked a plane and demanded $200,000 and 4 parachutes. He then jumped out of the plane with the money and was never seen again. His identity and fate remain unknown to this day. 1. In ancient China, there was a practice called foot binding that involved breaking and wrapping the feet of young girls to make them smaller and more desirable. The practice lasted for over 1,000 years and resulted in severe deformities and infections for millions of women. 2. In 1986, a lake named Lake Nyos in Cameroon released a huge cloud of carbon dioxide that suffocated nearly 1,800 people and 3,500 livestock. The lake sits on top of a volcanic crater that periodically emits gas into the water. The gas built up over time and was triggered by a landslide or an earthquake. 1. In 1939, Adolf Hitler's nephew wrote an article called "Why I Hate My Uncle" for an American magazine. He served in the U.S. Navy in World War II. After the war, William Hitler changed his last name to Stuart Houston and lived in New York until his death in 1987. 2. In ancient China, there was an imperial exam system that determined who could become government officials. The exams were based on Confucian classics and tested candidates on their knowledge, morality, and writing skills. The exams were very difficult and competitive, and some candidates resorted to cheating or suicide. 1. In ancient Egypt, there was a pharaoh named Hatshepsut who ruled as a female king. She wore male clothing and a false beard to assert her authority. She also built many monuments and temples during her reign. She was later erased from history by her successors who tried to destroy her statues and inscriptions. 2. In 1963, a cat named Félicette became the first and only cat to go to space. She was launched by the French space program on a suborbital flight and survived the trip. She was later euthanized so that scientists could study the effects of space travel on her brain. 1. In ancient Japan, there was a class of warriors called samurai who followed a strict code of honor and loyalty. They were skilled in swordsmanship, archery, horseback riding, and martial arts. They also practiced ritual suicide or seppuku if they failed or dishonored their lord. 2. In ancient Scandinavia, there was a group of warriors called Vikings who raided and traded across Europe and Asia. They were known for their long ships, axes, helmets, and runes. They also believed in a pantheon of gods. 1. In 1958, a man named Thomas Fitzpatrick stole a plane twice and landed it in front of a bar in New York City. He did it as a drunken bet after claiming that he could fly from New Jersey to Manhattan in 15 minutes. He was arrested both times but only received a $100 fine for the first stunt. 2. In ancient Greece, there was a philosopher named Diogenes who lived in a barrel and rejected all social norms. He was known for his witty and sarcastic remarks, such as telling Alexander the Great to move out of his sunlight, or asking for a plucked chicken to be accepted as Plato's definition of a man.